Lord be with you. The gospel this morning is actually a mixture of two different gospel sources. Part of it is taken from the Gospel of Luke, and part of it is taken from the Gnostic Gospel of Philip. Jesus walked through the towns and villages, preaching and announcing the good news of God's kingdom. The 12 were with him, and also some women whom he had cured of evil spirits and diseases. Mary, the one from Magdala, from whom 7 demons had been cast out, and Joanna, the wife of Chusa, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their own resources. There were 3 who always walked with the Lord: Mary, his mother, and her sister, and the Magdalene, the one who was called his companion. His sister and his mother and his companion were each called Mary. And the companion of the Savior was Mary Magdalene. But Christ loved her more than all the disciples and used to kiss her often on her mouth. The rest of the disciples were offended by this and expressed disapproval. They said to him, "Why do you love her? Why do you love her more than you love us?" The Savior answered and said to them, "Why do I not love you as I love her?" The gospel inspired by God. When I went to Kenya in 1972, there was only, apart from the bishop who was an African bishop, there was only one Kenyan priest in the entire diocese of Nakuru, a man called Peter Cairo, who is actually now the bishop in that diocese. By the time I left there 14 years later, there was a lot of African priests in the diocese. And now it is mainly African priests and very, very few white missionaries, as indeed it should be. But I remember one day, shortly before I left Kenya, I was in the town of Nakuru, and I'm walking along the street, and I come across 2 of the African priests, Peter Cairo, who's now the bishop there, and a guy called Francis Kishia. And they're both Kikuyus, they're from the same tribe, the Kikuyu tribe. But as I'm getting nearer, I can hear them conversing very animatedly, and they're speaking in English. And this strikes me as really funny. Why aren't they speaking Kikuyu, which is their mother tongue? Or at least, why aren't they speaking Swahili, which would have been the second language they would have learned? They would have only learned English when they went to high school. And so when I came up to them, I said, "Guys, why are you talking in English?" And Peter said to me, "Because the subject we're discussing, there is no vocabulary for it in Kikuyu or in Swahili. They were talking about a theological issue, and there's no adequate language either in Kikuyu or Swahili for it." So different languages have different strengths and different kinds of inadequacies. And I want to talk about this today. I'm going to make 4 main points this morning. I'm going to talk very, very briefly about a quick comparison among some languages. And then secondly, a very brief history of the evolution of language. And then I'm going to talk about the language of the Song of Songs today. And then fourthly, the language of Philip's Gospel that I just read for you. So just a very quick look at some languages, their strengths and weaknesses. Some languages are very, very good at some stuff, and they're very, very poor at other stuff. And so, for instance, if you really want to talk about theology or philosophy, the very best language to discuss those topics in would be German. No language does it better than German, unless you want to go back to the original Latin. Latin is really, really good at philosophical and theological debate. But among modern languages, German is easily the best. If you're interested in music or poetry, then the Romance languages are excellent. Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, these are the ones you want to get into. If you're interested in great storytelling, Irish is the language to go to. And part of the reason is that in Irish, we put the adjectives after the noun they qualify, which means you can add as many adjectives as you want. In English, you're stuck, because the adjectives come before the noun they qualify. So you don't know what noun they're going to qualify, so you can't add on a whole bunch of adjectives because you have no idea what they're pointing towards. When you get to Irish, it's totally different. You stick in your noun, and then there's a whole bunch of adjectives. And at least a really, really beautiful language. So there's a kind of Irish poetry, for instance, called Fíneocht, and it's the language go way, way, way back to almost the time of Christ. And you get stuff in Fíneocht like Chorder glún glia agus trigle tacha, agus chorder lem lofer lochairog sa varga viochonok viorgain. And then they add on all these adjectives onto it. So it's a really brilliant language for talking about, for storytelling and stuff like that. If you want to talk about snow, you need to learn Inuit. Inuit or Intuit? I mixed the Inuit. Okay. There's 50 different words for snow in the Eskimo language. If you want to talk about reindeer, you need to learn a language called Sami, S-A-M-I, which are a group of tribes that live in northern Scandinavia and northern Russia. They have over 1,000 different words for reindeer. And then we have English. By the year 1950, there were 500,000 terms in the English language. On the 1st of January 2012, a huge big Google search of English literature told us that there are now 1,013,913 words in the English language. So it's huge. So if you want to talk about technology and engineering, English is the language to go to. But if you're interested in esoteric phenomena or mystical language or spiritual stuff, English is pretty pathetic. And so, for instance, we have one little meager word to talk about love. And love is so multifaceted. There's one tiny little English word that has to do justice for a whole bunch of different related phenomena. So, for instance, if you go into Greek, Greek has 4 different words for love, totally different kinds of love. So you got the word agape, which is a spiritual kind of love, the love that exists between, God and us and God. You got philia, which is kind of brotherly love, which we get the name of the city, Philadelphia. So it's brotherly love or love of neighbor. It's a totally different quality to it. You get eros, which is romantic, erotic love. Very, very different again. And you get a 4th one called storge. And storge is kind of affection, particularly affection you have for your own children. So there are 4 totally different kinds of love. So when you get to some languages, they're really, really good. If you go to a language like, for instance, Sanskrit, or you go to Tibetan, these are great, great languages for talking about spiritual and esoteric and mystical concepts. But English is pretty pathetic. So when you compare languages, depending on which language you're using, you're going to be stuck. When we're talking about spiritual topics, we either have to borrow terms from Sanskrit or from Buddhism, or we have to try to make up words to explain the terminology. But they don't come naturally to the English language. So that's just the first point. So the second point then, just a very, very brief history of the evolution of language. All languages are symbol systems. Even the greatest language of all, in my opinion, is mathematics. But even mathematics is a symbol system, right? So all other languages are just basic symbol systems, and then we build on them slowly by slowly. So the first kind of language, I believe, was just pointing. When Homo sapiens evolved 50,000 years ago, the first you go out hunting with a bunch of guys, and you see a pig passing by, and you go. So if you have no way of indicating otherwise, you're just pointing at stuff. So the first language was just pointing. And then at some stage, we developed grunts of various kinds. So we could put a particular grunt, pig, or chicken, or tiger, or stuff like this. And then these grunts get more and more sophisticated, until finally we have a grunt that says anti-disestablishmentarianism, with 27 letters in it. So basically it's just a series of grunts that get more and more sophisticated. And then at some stage, we develop art forms. And now we're representing stuff in art, various art forms. And then eventually we get to writing, and we begin to create symbols that we can read to each other. And these symbols then multiply. So that's the first level of language. It's a symbolic system. All languages are symbolic systems. But then within language itself, we add a second tier of symbol through metaphor and allegory. Particularly when we want to speak about more esoteric phenomena, we have to add a second tier to it. So whenever you're dealing with mythology, or folklore, or religious ritual, or the scriptural traditions, there's a whole other tier of symbol that goes on top of just the symbol, which is language itself. And particularly if you want to talk about stuff like God, or stuff like the love of God, then you've got to build a whole bunch of stuff on top of that. So when you look through the language systems then and the religious symbology, you begin to see that particular kinds of metaphors or styles of metaphor begin to emerge. And they're basically of 6 kinds, it seems to me. We speak of God as a parent figure. We use the metaphor of a parent. So God is, Jesus will call him Abba, Daddy, or you'll talk about the mother goddess. And so there's the language of a parent where we're talking about God as some kind of a parent. So it's obviously allegory or metaphorical, because God obviously doesn't have gender. In fact, anything we say about God is made up. God is ineffable. We can experience God. But as soon as we try to confine God to any kind of language category, we've lost it already. So we use metaphors and analogies and parables in order to try to refer to the experiences we have of God. So a whole one bunch of these metaphors are kind of parental metaphors, where we regard God as some kind of a parent figure, a mother goddess, or our father, our Abba, something like that. But interestingly, there's a second level where we regard God as a child, and we are parents to it. And so the whole Christmas story, our whole Christmas pageantry, God is reduced to a little infant that comes into the world, and we, in some senses, are parenting this God. And in actual fact, in all the great traditions, whenever you get an avatar incarnating as a little baby, in some senses, the God has come among us as a little infant. And so there's a whole other level of the love that we have for God, or God has for us, in which we are the parents and God is the infant. So that would be a second level. A third level is where we regard God as friend. And you get this Christian hymn that says, what a friend we have in Jesus. And so this notion that somehow that we walk the road together, that God is not some kind of a distant, demanding deity, nor yet a judge or a jailer or an executioner, but that there's a friendship and that we walk this road of incarnation somehow together. That would be a third level of metaphor that we tend to employ about God. And then there's a strange one where God is regarded as a slave master, and that we are the slaves in some fashion. And you can regard this as a kind of a craven, kind of a fearful, self-abnegating, breastbeating version. Or you could think about it as, in some senses, in systems where there was slave masters and slaves, that the slaves was dependent radically upon the master for all its needs. So in this sense, it's that all our needs are provided for us by God. So not in the sense that there's somebody coming around with a whip lashing us into shape, and bending us to our task, but rather that everything, all our needs are provided for by this. And then there's this very strange inversion of this that you find in the book of Isaiah, where God is the slave and we are the master. So there's this great song, for instance, came out in the 60s or 70s that says something like, can a mother forget her baby, or a woman the child within her womb? Yet even if these forget, I will never forget my own. And it goes on to say that God says to Israel, I have carved your name on the palm of my hand. Now there's a very important symbolism to this. In the olden days, when a slave master owned slaves, the slave master carved his name on the palms of his slave's hands. And so if a slave tried to escape, all you needed to do was grab his hand and find out, hey, you belong to Eva. Okay? Right? All you got to do is look at the palm of his hand. Whose name was written there? That's who he belonged to.
No, Eva belongs to me.
No, let me see who you're found Eva. No, I didn't say it. You erased it. So here's God saying in Isaiah, I have carved your name on the palms of my hand, which means, I'm the slave, you're the slave master. So there's an extraordinary inversion of this myth, that in some senses God is radically dependent upon us in order to kind of bring the kingdom to fruition. That our job is to create Christ consciousness in our times and in our planet, and in some senses God is radically dependent upon us to do this work. God does not interfere and just create it through a fiat. It has to happen through human effort. So that would be a fifth image. And then you have this beautiful imagery of an erotic relationship between God and human beings. And it comes through, and the next point I'll talk about will be the Song of Songs. But in medieval Christian mysticism, particularly among the women mystics of medieval Christianity, the language is highly erotic. The ways in which they speak about their relationship with God, highly, highly erotic. And again, the church has difficulties, of course, with this, so they use it very, very symbolically. But in actual fact, they talk about the incendium amoris, that the heart literally is on fire. Your whole chest area is burning up with this, love of the beloved in God in this instance. And so language itself, as it evolves, creates all these metaphors. So you get metaphor and symbol built upon metaphor and symbol when you want to talk about more esoteric notions like God and love. Which brings me then to the third point. This beautiful reading from the Song of Songs. Now, it's attributed to Solomon. And Solomon flourished. He ruled over Israel between 970 BC, when his father David died, and 930 BC, when he died himself. And this is attributed to Solomon. But Solomon did not write this. This comes much, much later in Judaism, probably around the year 400 BC, so 500 years after Solomon. But it's sometimes called the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. In Hebrew, it's called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, in the sense of the mother of all songs, or the greatest song of all time. And it's this extraordinary love song. And I can never figure out how it escaped the censors, how it managed to scrape through in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Christian scriptures. Because when you read the original versions of it, the language has been toned down very, very significantly. And a lot of the illusions have been covered over. But it's really sensual material. When you read it in the original stuff, it's bordering on the soft pornographic. Yeah, it's powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. And a lot of allegory, which are used symbolically, but when you read kind of the original, you know exactly what they mean. So it's going to use stuff like wine and apples, apple trees, oil, ointment, raisin cakes. It's using a whole bunch of allusions, which are in the original are highly, highly sensual allusions. And it's a backwards and forwards play between a man and his beloved, where they're making up poetry for each other and kind of singing songs to each other. So it's really, really, really powerful, beautiful stuff. And somehow it escaped the censors. And to kind of make it acceptable, they cleaned up the language and took out some of the allusions. And then, as well as that, they pretended in the Hebrew scriptures as if this wasn't just a song, celebrating sexuality. Rather, it was a song celebrating the relationship between God and Israel. So it was like the Song of the Covenant. And in that sense, they cleaned it up a little bit. And then Christianity took over, and they claimed that this was a song between Christ and his bride, the church. So this is a love song between Jesus and the church. And of course, there's none of these things. You can use it metaphorically as that, and you can use it as a metaphor between Israel and God. It's celebrating sexuality and sensuality, the basic way in which life generates itself. But, they try to clean it up, and they try to use it allegorically and metaphorically. And you can use it as that. I claim, for instance, that every love song that's ever been written is a song about God. Because what attracts us in the beloved is the God essence within them. Whether or not we're aware of this, or whether we sexualize it completely, or even, objectify it, basically all love songs are songs between the soul and the source. And so in this sense, you could say it is a metaphor between the love of Israel and God, or the love of Jesus and his church. It is those things. But it's a celebration of sensuality and sexuality in the way in which life begets life. That's my third point. And the fourth point then I want to pick up on Philip's gospel. And in today's reading, I've used a little bit from Luke's gospel and a little bit from the gospel of Philip. Luke is a canonical gospel and Philip is a Gnostic gospel. But since they're both treating of the same phenomenon, they're put together today. Because they represent the very, very different versions of church that you find in the early Christian community, all over the place. So there are versions of the message that tell you that Jesus only had male disciples. And he very certainly only had male apostles. That when he picked out the special 12, it was only men. So it's like there's a big crowd who's following him. And then he picks out 72 disciples, all of whom are male. And then he picks out a special 12, the apostles, all of whom are male. And then he's got a special 3 that he takes on special safaris. And these are Peter, James, and John. That's one version of the story. It's a totally different version of the story. And you hear it in Philip's gospel today, where Philip says, there were 3 who always walked with the Lord. And all 3 were called Mary. There was his mother Mary. There's a little bit of confusion in the gospel itself, but the second person, it's either his aunt Mary or his sister Mary. And then the third one is Mary of Magdala, who was designated as the companion of the Lord. But according to Philip's gospel, the 3 most closest people to Jesus were not 3 males. There were 3 females. There were his mother, his sister, and his companion. And so you get very, very different versions, of what constituted the early churches. And of course, the truth is, there are many, many different early Christian communities, all of whom are led by different people with different kinds of theologies, different senses of who Jesus was and what his purpose was. But at some stage in the early first century, in order to try and gain any traction or gain any respectability in a patriarchal world, they had to prune away all references to women leaders. And so I'm totally convinced that among the disciples of Jesus Christ were many women. Now, Luke gives the impression today that the only purpose the women had was, he says, there was a group of women who followed them around as well, kind of a little addendum. And you get the impression that their function was to do the laundry and the cooking. Or that there was a few rich women there, and they kind of supported this Christ effort out of their money, taking their husband's money to support this wandering carpenter. So this is the impression you get in Luke's Gospel, that they're just a little kind of a tag-on bunch of laundry attendants and cooks, who finance the operation occasionally. And Philip has a totally different understanding of it. In Philip, there are women leaders of the church, including Mary of Magdala, and that some of the Gospels were written by these women leaders. But then, as I say, it got sanitized. And not only is Mary taken out of the picture, she's actually reduced to a repentant harlot, out of whom 7 demons had been cast. So not only is she taken out of a position of leadership, not only is she separated and divorced from Jesus artificially after he has died, but she's even denigrated to the extent that she was basically just, a sicko that Jesus cured and kind of tagged along. And because she got rich, and you can imagine how she got rich, she was contributing to the coffers from Roman riches. And that exactly is not the story. So according to Philip's Gospel, you get this beautiful statement where it says, there were 3 who always walked with the Lord. All 3 were called Mary. There was his mother Mary, his sister Mary, and Mary his companion. And he loved her more than all other people. And the male disciples were really bent out of shape by this. And this is true not just in Philip's Gospel, you find this in several of the other Gnostic Gospels. And the chief culprit is Peter each time. When they name names, Peter's the guy who was the biggest problem with this relationship between Jesus and Mary of Magdala. And you find this in several of the Gnostic Gospels. But in this story today, they object and they say to him, the first statement is that he used to frequently kiss her on the mouth. Now, in fairness, that's an inference. It doesn't say on the mouth, because in the actual physical papyrus, there's actually a hole in the physical papyrus where it says he used to regularly kiss her on and there's a gap. So it could have been on the hand, the forehead, the tush, who knows? But the inference is that he used to kiss her on the mouth. And it's a valid inference when you look at the next part of the story. But the actual word itself is missing. So we don't know where he used to kiss her. But the inference subsequently, it must have been on the lips, because everybody got really, really upset with him. And they ask him, why do you why do you love her more than you love us? Now, the church has tried to explain away this piece by saying, kissing somebody on the lips is actually just a metaphor for the oral transmission. So, a teacher passes on the teaching to the students by using his lips and his mouth. So kissing on the lips is just a metaphor for passing on the message. Or it could be, sometimes it's just a commissioning ceremony, that you kiss somebody on the lips, to transmit the lineage to the next person. But it's a totally symbolic gesture where you're just passing the lineage on to somebody else. Or it could be a romantic gesture. Now, so what's the deal here? Obviously, they think it's a romantic gesture because they're really bent out of shape. And they say to him, why do you love her more than you love us? And Jesus turns around and he says, that's not the question. Why do I love her more than I love you? The question is, why do I not love you like or in the same manner that I love her? So it's not a question of amount of love, it's a question of kind of love. Now, in today's story, it didn't go far enough, because the next story in Philip's Gospel gives Jesus fuller response to this. And he responds with a parable. And so they ask him, why do you love her more than you love us? And he says, that's not the question. That's not the question. The question is, why do I not love you like I love her? And I'll tell you why I do not like you like I love her. Once upon a time, there were 2 men in a deep, 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 dark, dark, dark cave. They couldn't see anything because it's pitch dark. One of the guys is blind and the other is sighted, but neither of them can see because it's pitch dark in the cave. But then they come out of the cave. I know the sighted guy can see the light, but the blind man still can't see anything. That's why I love Mary in a different way from how I love you. So, okay, what does that mean? It means that Mary is sighted and the apostles are blind. Mary knows, in some senses, Mary has a kind of what I would call a Christa consciousness. that kind of parallels Jesus, Christ conscious. Mary is a fully awake Buddha figure. And so when the light came, Mary recognized the light. The apostles are asleep, they're blind. So when the light came, they're still blind. They thought he was just a kind of a meal ticket to fame. He was going to become the king of Israel, and they were going to be kind of viceroy, kind of minister for finance, minister for transport, minister for agriculture, minister for defense, whatever. They were lining up the jobs. So they had no idea who this guy was. So even when the light came, they're still blind. The light came, and Mary can see what the light is, and she recognizes him immediately. And so that's the importance of their connection. That in some senses, Mary and Jesus, in my opinion, they represented the feminine and the masculine faces of the incarnated God. That when God decides to incarnate and send avatars among us, there's a male aspect to this and there's a female aspect to this. And at some stage, these two incarnated avatars met and recognized each other immediately and saw what they had come to do. And so the journey of Mary and the journey of Jesus are totally interconnected. They are the journey between the feminine face and the masculine face of God incarnate.